Greetings, campers! Welcome to the world according to Yoni. As ever, I am your host, Yoni Martin, and that's not going to change. As long as I'm here, I'm Yoni Martin and you're not. So there you go. My guest today is author, television writer, producer, voiceover actor extraordinaire, Steve Stoliar. Steve has written a book. Well, actually, he wrote the book years ago, but he updated it recently. It's called Raised Eyebrows, My Years Inside Groucho's House. Groucho being the one, the only Groucho Marx. For the last 3 years of Groucho's life, Steve was his secretary / archivist. I don't know that there's anybody living who has a better view on the last 3 years of Groucho Marx's life than Steve. So this is going to be a fascinating conversation. So fascinating, in fact, that I'm going to spend almost 2 hours with Steve, which we're going to break into 2 parts. So today we'll have part 1. I'm a Marx Brothers fanatic, which is why I hate Steve, because of course he got to be on the inside for the last 3 years of Groucho's life, which I suppose is a mixed blessing, because for anybody who knows the history of Groucho's last year, there was a woman named Erin Fleming who created a lot of controversy. She was Groucho's manager. Some people thought she was his girlfriend. I don't really think she was, but Steve will tell us more about that. So without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, I give you Steve Stoliar. Hi, Steve.
Hello.
I am so jealous of you, but of course,
thank you.
You would know that. Today we are going to talk about everything Groucho, and probably some things that the audience doesn't know we're going to talk about, which will get us both in trouble. But that's the fun part.
Good trouble.
Yes. Before we do, though, I wanted to show you. We thought we were moving out of this hellhole we're living in, so I couldn't find all my books. But I just wanted to show you a little of my Groucho memorabilia, like
the cocktail napkins.
Cocktail napkins, yeah, man. And then, of course,
Alan Isle.
Yeah.
That was an absolute must when I was younger, because there were so few books on the Marx Brothers.
I couldn't find my copy of Wyatt. It's around here somewhere.
Zimmerman,
which was
Adamson. Excellent photos.
And
okay, some good images.
Yeah, I like the way you said that. Good images. Let's see. The Groucho letters.
Yeah.
I don't think I could find Arthur's book. Let me see. No, but you'll know this one pretty well.
Yes, I knew her well. I was
Aaron's
working on it, and there's much to recommend the book, and it's also frustrating, if only because there's no index and it's not in any discernible order.
I also have
Hooray for Captain Spaulding. Yes, indeed, with the Hirschfeld cover.
I am, just proving my Groucho creds here.
Yes. Miriam's book of her dad's.
And then 3 others that I want you to see. My well-worn copy of Dick Cavett's autobiography.
My favorite all-time book.
This is a wonderful book. I've read that at least 3 times. And then Harpo Speaks, and signed to me by Bill. How can I do that? Yeah.
Very good.
And finally, something that I showed Louis Stadlin because it came up in our conversations, but
Wolcott? Yeah.
Yep, Wolcott.
Not Franklin P. Adams. William Auerbach Levy caricature on the front.
Yeah. I love that book. I lost my original copy of it, and I hunted down a second copy because it's not easy to find.
Really?
Yeah, but as Lewis said to me, he said that Groucho told him that Wolcott wanted to have Harpo's baby. He loved him so much. So that was, but the Algonquin Round Table and all those literary people who were a part of that. I know Harpo was the main Marx brother who was a part of it, but Groucho uh, had some.
He wasn't really, I don't really hear about the other brothers being there. But I mean, Wolcott was just so enchanted by Harpo when he saw him
Oh, yeah.
on stage in I'll Say She Is, and wrote a glowing review more focusing on Harpo. I don't know whether it was just that Groucho didn't want the competition. I'm not sure why. He liked the people individually. I mean, Kaufman was one of Groucho's closest friends.
And Benchley.
Yeah. So, but he just didn't really get into that scene as much. But yeah, Harpo.
But of course, we want to talk about your book, Raised Eyebrows, which, as I've told you already, I found heartwarming, heartrending.
Yeah.
It was really an amazing read. I sat down and I did it in 2 sittings because I started in the evening one night and I finished it the next day, but it was less than 24 hours between starting and finishing.
People have said to me, you owe me 8 hours sleep. I was going to just get into your book and stop at a convenient point. And I guess because of the TV writing I've done, I know how to end an act with something that will keep you tuned in through the commercial. You want to open with like a body falling out of a closet to grab their attention. And then you don't want them to go, okay, that satisfies my reading hunger for the moment. I can put this aside. And so people would say, just one chapter blended into the next, and then it was 2 a.m, and I just had to push through to the end. And
see, and at 2 a.m, I did exactly the opposite. I said, I've got to get some sleep or I'm not going to make it. But I got up early and started reading again.
Okay.
So I did. But I mean, you, of all the books, all the wonderful books, the crappy books, which we'll get to in a second, you had a perspective that no one else had because of where you spent the last 3 years of Groucho's life, and you tell it not only in fascinating detail, but it's just your honesty and your willingness, even when it comes to Aaron Fleming, to see both sides. I mean,
yeah, I figured out at the onset, my intention was simply to see if I could almost archaeologically reconstruct the chronology from being a rabid Marx Brothers fan to catching a glimpse of Groucho from the back of the Dorothy Chandler Pavilion for his one-man show, to shaking his hand and getting the job and spending 3 years inside his house, and to just do as complete a jigsaw puzzle as I could, using the basic trunk of the tree was my own vivid memories, which hadn't changed. But there were notes that I took and letters that friends saved when I would zip the paper into the typewriter and say, oh, here's what happened at lunch today, and Groucho said this. And I never really had a temptation to exaggerate or fabricate anything, because I was hoping that the truth was interesting enough without turning me into a hero, making my importance in the household a bigger deal than it was, soft pedaling the fact that Groucho was getting frail, skipping the positive elements of what Aaron Fleming brought to Groucho in those years. I just felt like if I tell the truth as I saw it to the best of my ability, and that people tend to be sculptural. They don't tend to be all heroic or all villainous. And one of the themes in the book is a quote of André Gide, who said, "The color of truth is gray." And as I've gotten older and consider myself more reasonable and less idealistic, I get almost as upset with my ultra progressive friends as I do with the people on the far right, because they're just as rigid. And it's like, oh, if you give a quarter of an inch, then you've surrendered. So let's not compromise at all. And it's like, I have a more reasoned approach to things in life. And so with the characters in the book, if I remembered something positive about someone I didn't care about, I included it in the book. And if there was something unflattering about someone I admired, including myself, I didn't spare me.
No, you didn't.
I put it in. And my plan was to take the reader, hopefully more than just the one, alongside me through this journey, as if he or she were standing next to me when it was going on. And a number of people have said they felt that way. And that's really gratifying to hear. And the other gratifying thing, which is what you said, was that you're envious of me. Or even stronger, when people say, "I hate you." It's sort of the ultimate compliment.
Yeah, of course.
Yes, I would hate me too if I wasn't me. If I heard that there was this kid that was a fanatic Marx Brothers aficionado, and all he wanted to do was shake Groucho's hand, and instead he got pulled into the household and worked there initially every day, and being able to spend quality time with Groucho and Zeppo and Gummo, the extant Marx Brothers, and Jack Lemmon and Steve Allen and S.J. Perelman and Mae West and Bob Hope, and people that, whose names I was used to seeing roll by at the beginning or end of the Marx Brothers movies, directors, writers, Nat Perrin, Eddie Bazell, Maury Riskin, and to be able to chat with them comfortably, not just, pushing for an autograph with a crowd of people or something, but sitting at the lunch table with George Burns and Groucho. It was mind-blowing, and I never took any of it for granted. I always was grateful, especially as the tour vans would stop by and I would hear, "This is the home of Groucho Marx at the Marx." And I would think, I know what they're looking for, a glimpse or something. Sometimes I would wave through the window in the kitchen, figuring that the guy would go back to Milwaukee and say, "Well, I think it was Groucho waving at me. I mean, the lady said it was his house, and I don't know for sure, but because I always was a fan and remain a fan. So I always sort of had one foot outside. And so it never got routine. And, there were some very dark elements to the story. The two main detractors being the fact that I was getting close to my hero as he's fading out. So my emotional investment was greater than it had been from afar, watching him slowly go downhill. And then the other was the mercurial temperament of Erin Fleming, the Canadian actress who had started out as his secretary and became his manager. And really, as he grew weaker, he grew more dependent on her, which fed her ego. She had a number of psychological and pharmacological problems. And so this sort of eccentric, volatile, crazy woman was in charge of this frail, elderly man. And then there I am at 19 or 20 trying to maneuver some middle ground where I'm able to get along with all the different personalities there. And I came from a very middle of the road kind of sedate childhood. We didn't have screaming and slamming of doors or hitting. I was I was judiciously spanked, but it was never like a parent flying off the handle and beating the shit out of me or something.
Well, that's good.
Yes. I didn't have that. So I wasn't used to people that screamed and threw things and streams of 4-letter words and all that. My mom and dad were very middle of the road, and it didn't require loud stuff. I mean, if my dad just said, "All right, that's enough of that," that was the equivalent of ranting and raving, and we knew to not push it any further. But with Aaron, all bets were off, all wheels were off the bus.
I can't even imagine even having read about it.
Yeah.
Just nuts.
But I mean, somehow through, I don't know, instinct or luck or a blend of them, I managed to be the longest surviving employee in the whole household. I watched Aaron hire and fire endless like accountants, publicists, nurses, cooks, housekeepers, assistants. They came and went just like they were the latest thing and fabulous, and then off with their heads over some real or imagined slight.
Hey, you survived the coup. I mean, yes. That was...
yes, I was an insurrectionist. Well, those of us in the household who cared about Groucho and what was best for him, it was a gossipy household. And so when Groucho and Aaron weren't around, we would gather either in my office at the house or in the kitchen or something, and just sort of, what did you experience today? And what did she say this time? And what was the effect of it? And we were really concerned about his health because it was frail to begin with. He was in his mid-80s. He'd had strokes. He had hardening of the arteries and, was slowing down, although his sense of humor remained through to the end, which was very gratifying. And we thought, he's addicted to Aaron. So if you remove her, would that put him through like cold turkey with a heroin addict, which could kill him? Assuming we had the power to somehow subtract her from his life, which is questionable, then what would the impact of that be on Groucho? Because he liked having her around, even though she put him through the ringer too and screamed and would drive his blood pressure up. But there was one nurse named Connie August, and she was pretty and young, and Groucho liked having her around. And she had a medical background and knew what was best for him, medically and physically. And so there was this plan, and we had the backing of Groucho's longtime friends who had been alienated over the years by Aaron sort of poisoning Groucho against them, Groucho's family. And I mean, it's a cliche because it's so often the case, but as the curtain descends on a legendary figure, a younger woman comes in and alienates the family and friends. And that's sort of what happened here. So they were on the side of the insurgents, and they couldn't wait to sort of rush in and comfort Groucho and explain to him that they were still there for him and that he'd be okay. Somehow Aaron got wind of someone ratted us out. I don't know who it was, but she found out about it. And in the early morning hours one night at the dorm I was living at UCLA, the phone rang, and it was Aaron saying, "I understand you're in on a plot to get rid of me." Now, she was always paranoid. She always was seeing real and imagined enemies and reading things into something that weren't there and missing giant things that were there. So normally, assuming there's any such thing as normally in a case like this, if someone phoned you up and said, "I understand you're in on a plot to get rid of me," it would be the ravings of a paranoid well, why are you looking at me like that? What are you thinking? What's going on? I'm not gonna. In this case, she was absolutely dead on. I was, in fact, in on a plot to get rid of her, not to kill her and make it look like an accident, but to subtract her from the household. And I don't know how I talked my way out of that, because, as I say, she would fire people on the fumes of a suspicion that were groundless. But I'm, oh, Aaron, no, I mean, I remain grateful to you for the job, and what would happen to Groucho if you weren't around? And somehow I put out that fire and stayed for another.
Yeah, it's amazing considering how many others she fired.
Heads were rolling down Hillcrest Road every time I drove up from Sunset. Oh, there goes, that was John. All right. Oh, there's Connie. Bye. So, I don't know. Did you even ask a question that I answered, or who cares?
Who cares? We're getting the Machiavellian story here, but I do want to go back to the beginning, because I owe you a debt of gratitude, as do pretty much any Marx Brothers fan, for animal crackers. And so if you would explain to those of my audience who don't know or haven't yet read your book, which they're going to do because I'm going to command it, but tell them about
his book.
Yes.
So let it be written. So let it be done. How can I do this in a compressed manner?
Don't compress it. Just have fun with it.
I can't do both. Make up your mind. It's the old joke. When I grow up, I want to be an actor. Make up your mind. You can't do both. The Marx Brothers' second film, Animal Crackers, 1930, was based on their successful Broadway musical of the same name. It was their second film. They made it at Paramount. In the late 40s, Paramount sold its old films, pre-48, to MCA Universal, because Universal wanted to syndicate them in television packages. So that's when you would see that annoying triangle that said MCA TV release. And I wanted to scrawl an N, so it was an MCA. But you'd see this shield that went, and then the Paramount Mountain. And that's how we caught up with Mae West movies and early Fields movies and Monkey Business, Horse Feathers, and Duck Soup. And all because of that package that Paramount sold to Universal. Well, Animal Crackers was included in the package, but because of a technicality, MCA couldn't syndicate it and show it on TV or bring it out again in theaters if they wanted, because essentially due to a clerical error, the copyright had expired and the rights per the contract had reverted back to the writers and composers of the play. George Kaufman, Maury Riskin, Harry Ruby, and Bert Kalmar. So Universal acquired, as part of the package, this film they couldn't really do anything with. And they certainly didn't think it was worth spending money untangling this legal problem to put out this creaky 1930 black and white movie. Well, for Marx Brothers fans, this was the holy grail of Marx.
Absolutely.
They only made about a dozen movies. They weren't like Laurel and Hardy or the Three Stooges, where in addition to their feature films, they made dozens and dozens of short films and sound and talkies, and late into the 50s. There's only a handful of movies. And this wasn't one of the cheesy later ones. This was Groucho
one of the...
as Captain Spaulding, from which his Hooray for Captain Spaulding theme song, which was used on You Bet Your Life, his quiz show, and had some of their best material in it. So it was an important film historically, but also, just some wonderful material in it. So I started a committee at UCLA, where I was attending as a history major, to put pressure on Universal to go ahead and do what it took to clear the rights and re-release Animal Crackers. So I formed the committee for the re-release of Animal Crackers, and we had a table and a petitions on clipboards, and on Bruin Walk, which is the main student entrance for UCLA. We were walking up to all the other buildings, and there were other tables for legalizing marijuana, gay rights, ending the war, all these things. And then we were trying to get an old Marx Brothers movie released. And I managed to get in touch with Aaron Fleming, the aforementioned, who had been trying to get Universal to re-release the film. And she was all for what we were doing because she needed to show Universal that it wasn't just her, it wasn't just Groucho, but lots of people really wanted to see this. So she arranged for Groucho to come to UCLA. I said, Groucho, I am very happy to be meeting you after all this time. And he said, well, you should be. And Aaron said, this is Steve Stoliar. He's the one who's trying to get Animal Crackers re-released again. And Groucho said, well, did you get it? And I said, not yet, but we're working on it. And he said, well, you better or I'll fire you. And I said, I didn't even realize I was working for you. How much are you paying me? And he said, a little less than nothing. And I'm, pinching myself thinking, here I am gabbing with my hero, my heart pounding out of my chest, hoping I'm making sense. And we sat side by side with a crush, hundreds of UCLA students leaning in to hear his whispery answers, and news people with microphones and news cameras all around. And there's Groucho and Steve talking about Animal Crackers and why it should be released. And, you had reporters saying, Mr. Marx, what is the purpose of your appearance here today? I expect to get lunch. No, but besides that, I may get dinner. And, what do you think of the young people today and how they're embracing the anarchy of the Marx Brothers? Well, it's very flattering. Last Halloween, 3 kids came to the door dressed as Groucho, Hoppo, and Chico. And I said, what did you give them? And he said, I sent for the police. So it was just an amazing thing. And sure enough, Universal relented. And they thought, fine, here. And they swung the deal and struck new prints. And they were going to put it out in New York and Los Angeles. And that was it. And it was like, here's your damn movie. Leave us alone. And it ended up breaking the house record at the UA Westwood, which had been set by the French Connection several years before. And I can't tell you, although I'm about to, how gratifying it was to be able to sit in a coffee shop in Westwood and look over and see a line down along the brick wall of the theater and turning the corner of all these college kids in T-shirts and jeans and tennis shoes waiting to plunk down their money to see this old movie that Universal thought, who's going to care to see this now? And Groucho attended the re-premiere. I rented a tuxedo. It was a real triumphant moment. I mean, truly a labor of love for me to help get this movie out during his lifetime, and for him to see people cheering and laughing. And he went to New York for the premiere there, and man, the stories about that. They had policemen on horseback keeping people from crushing him to death. It's like, It's like Elvis or the Beatles or Sinatra and the Bobby Sox. And so that was in 1974. And then that summer, I had, I think, 3 potential summer jobs that all fell through, for which I was and remain eternally grateful, because I was back home at at the family house in Tarzana in Los Angeles. And my dad was saying, I don't want you sitting on your fanny during summer vacation. Go to Taco Bell, see if they need someone there. This tire place on Ventura with a help wanted sign. You know, he came from the Depression. And for him, it was like, it isn't about enjoying your job. It's about getting and having a job. And to me, it's like, I don't want to work in a taco place. I don't want to work in a tire store. So I thought, I have nothing to lose before I subject myself to that. So I called Aaron Fleming and I said, is there anything at all that you think possibly I might perhaps be? And she said, well, actually, I had been Groucho's secretary and had been taking care of his fan mail. But because of all the renewed interest in the Marx Brothers, I've become his manager, and I just don't have time to handle all the fan mail. And we also need someone who really knows their Marx Brothers to organize all of Groucho's memorabilia that'll be donated to the Smithsonian after he's gone. And I'm thinking, please, yes, please. And in my mind's eye, like in a Tex Avery cartoon, I pictured myself on the doorstep of Groucho's house while Aaron was still on the phone explaining the job to me. It was like this jump cut where I'm there while she's still saying, and we feel. And so sure enough, I was hired. I was paid money, $3.50 an hour, which was more than twice minimum wage then. I could make my own hours and come and go as I wanted. And my assumption, because I always assumed the worst, I assumed I would be working at some office building on Wilshire Boulevard. It was like Groucho Marx Enterprises, you know, handling autographed pictures or something. And maybe I'd see Groucho once a month if he came in to sign checks or check up on things. I said, oh, no, dear. You'll be working right in Groucho's house. There's a room you can use for your office. And you can make your own hours. And I thought, I don't believe what I just fell into. And the first week, I worked from Monday to Saturday, and then figured I would take off Sunday. And then I was sitting at home on Sunday thinking, why am I here when I could be at Groucho Marx's house? Because I just so wanted to immerse myself in this atmosphere and the memorabilia and the stimulating conversation and all this stuff. And so in the summer of 74, my first summer there, I worked 7 days a week and couldn't get enough of it. It was like wading ankle deep in old photos and letters and posters and scripts with Groucho's handwritten notation. And then because it was a very egalitarian household, I was able to sit at the lunch table with him and whoever else was invited that day. There was no sense of the help eating in the kitchen kind of thing. So if it was just Groucho, I was able to talk to him, ask him questions I'd had for years and listen to his stories about vaudeville and the people he worked with and all this stuff. Or if it was, you know, Hal Cantor or Steve Allen or Jack Lemmon or George Burns, I would listen to their conversations, sometimes offering my own thoughts if I thought I had something to say, but tended to be more observing than participatory. And it was just this fabulous, I mean, the analogy I draw in Raised Eyebrows is that first day on the job was like Dorothy walking into Oz, and it goes from sepia to Technicolor. It's just, I walked through that door and it was this wonderland. And again, all I ever wanted to do was shake his hand and thank him for all the laughs. And instead, here we are. It was always so gratifying to hear Steve from down the hall. Just the idea that he knew my name. He also, this meant a lot to me. He appreciated the fact that I liked the same kind of things he did. That my generation wasn't all long-haired, hippie, pot-smoking rock and rollers who had no idea. You know, he liked the fact that I liked George Gershwin and Robert Benchley and knew the people behind the scenes of his films and wasn't just some scruffy kid. And one time, Steve and I go down to his room, and he has a $20 bill, and he says, "Go down to Tower Records. You know what I like." And it was so cool that I thought, he knows I know what he likes. I know what he likes. He doesn't have to explain. I don't want this. I don't want that. And he was pleased with what I brought back, which was a radio show that Harpo guest starred on, and then the double LP of Starring Fred Astaire, which had all those songs by people that he knew as friends: Irving Berlin, Jerome Kern, the Gershwins, Cole Porter. These were people that Groucho knew in 3 dimensions and in color.
And you brought back change.
And there was change. And as we know, change is good. Yes, he was pleased that I was that frugal. So it was, you know, pushing against the 2 big negative factors of knowing that his life is decrescendoing and trying to stay on Erin's good side, assuming she had one, whatever that consisted of. And it was stressful, and people would say, you know, so why do you put up with that kind of craziness? And it's, I didn't want to miss out on anything. It's like there was always something worthwhile. And I would help out with books that others were writing. I would do research for them or write captions and provide accurate editing notes. And, you know, and then towards the end, when there was this big battle between Erin and then Groucho's son Arthur and his faction over conservatorship of Groucho. I mean, now we have the Britney Spears thing in the news.
Yeah.
And it was a similar thing back then, although he wasn't 39, he was 86 and in failing health. And so there needed to be someone officially in charge of his health and well-being and finances. And stories started coming out from the nurses who'd been fired about Erin's abusiveness. And it was surreal for me to be seeing things in newspapers that no one had known about except those of us in the household or the friends that I had told, saying, "You won't believe the shit that Erin had today, and she did this and said this." So it wasn't so easy for Erin to say, well, Groucho would want me to be his conservator, so because the judge is hearing these stories about how abusive she is. But then she had said that if Arthur were in charge of Groucho, he'd put Groucho in a home, which Groucho was terrified of. And we were never sure if what Erin said was spot on or an exaggeration or fabrication, which is crazy making in and of itself.
How long before you knew that she was somewhat nuts?
I think when you run into someone that has a problem, it's very easy for your brain to dismiss or rationalize certain behavior. And it's only in retrospect that you go, well, I guess, you know, my husband coming home with lipstick on his collar, it wasn't because someone had thrown a maraschino cherry at his shirt, and it's, you know, or something like that. Years ago, I was in New York. I was roommates with a guy who, it was my first experience with an alcoholic, but I didn't know he was an alcoholic, even though, and it's like, you might say, Steve, how could you be that blind? Each morning, he would have a 6-pack of beer.
Wow.
Which I took as just sort of like an extension of frat life. It's like, all right, so he had beer. And when he went to dinner, he would have drinks before dinner, wine with dinner, brandy after dinner. And in and of itself, it all made sense. Lots of people have drinks before dinner, wine with dinner. And it was only cumulatively, and when I would see him, staggering around, that I realized nothing about this is acceptable and normal and all that. So with Erin, I mean, her eccentricity was there from early on, and I just sort of thought, well, she just has a broad personality. She just sort of colorful. But she would say, and there would be things like, I remember one cold winter's night, she had a fire going in the fireplace, thank God, at Groucho's. And she said, "It's so hot in here. I don't believe it. Can you go get some more wood for the fireplace?" And it's funny because when I ended up giving a deposition that lasted 3 days during the conservatorship hearing, and I told that story, and I had said, and Erin said, "Oh, it's so hot in here. Will you put some more wood on the fire?" And the stenotype person took it down as, "It's cold in here. Would you get it?" Her brain had edited it. And when I sat there with a red pen going through my deposition, I had to cross that out and initial that she really did say, "It's so hot in here." And then, as time wore on, her schizophrenia manifested itself more dramatically, and the shouting and the irrational outbursts and behavior and became more, you couldn't avoid it. I mean, it was right in front of you. But it wasn't an aha moment. There wasn't one, she's crazy and a danger to him. It was things that one at a time, my brain was able to kind of crunch and digest as not a big deal. And it was only cumulatively that I saw how unbalanced she was. And in fact, she was eventually diagnosed as paranoid schizophrenic.
Yeah. Well, we don't want to get ahead of ourselves with that one, but wasn't there kind of a thing where there was Groucho's friends and there were Erin's friends?
Yeah.
Like Bud Court.
I was naturally drawn to Groucho's friends, to the older. I mean, my interests were much more in line with theirs, even though they were from the late 1800s and early 1900s. Just my sensibilities and interests were, it was much cooler for me to be able to hang out with Nat Herron and George Fenneman and all these people. Erin was more into the current crop of kind of quirky, a lot of people from Robert Altman films, very offbeat, Elliot Gould and Sally Kellerman and Bud Court and George Siegel to a lesser degree. And she brought them into Groucho's circle. He liked them. It wasn't that it was an intrusion and he didn't like them at all. But, in my youth and naivete, I just I didn't feel a connection with them. I mean, some of them were into, recreational drugs, which was not unusual for the early and mid 70s. And I wasn't at all into that. But also they just were kind of weird and almost were sort of Erin's surrogate children. Erin was obsessed with having a child. Mercifully, she never did, because that kid, she even decided she would have a daughter and name the daughter Solange, which means one angel. And, luckily she didn't marry and didn't decide to have a child on her own. But the instinct, it was sort of a bent maternal instinct was there. And in a sense, I was sort of one of those people she brought in, to the nest. So there were these younger actors there. So it's like they may have been hotter and more current, but it meant a lot more to me to meet the people that wrote and directed Groucho's movies and the comedians from that, vaudeville and radio period.
Well, I'm with you. Over there, I have a Harry Ruby songbook on my bookshelf. I am 100% with you. I love those people. Kaufman, my God, what a brilliant mind. And even, his choice in younger friends, Dick Cavett, Woody Allen. I mean,
he enjoyed helping younger people that he believed in. I mean, he didn't like dirty comedy. I don't think he was into Lenny Bruce at all. He wasn't into Richard Pryor. He thought a dirty laugh was an easy laugh, even though he could tell bawdy stories. But as with a lot of people of his generation, Red Skelton was another. Apparently, he was just an unending stream of filthiest imaginable jokes in private, but was a wholesome clown who never swore or anything. That was the line, was, are you doing it in front of an audience? And Groucho didn't approve of it. He thought a dirty laugh is an easy laugh, he said. So, but he didn't just dismiss the new generation, the then new generation of comedians as, oh, we were the funny ones. These guys don't know what funny is. And the two that stood out the most were Dick Cavett and Woody Allen. And he took it on himself to turn on his peers to these young, up and coming. It's like, it's worth your while. Give him a chance. You ought to take a look at this fellow. He's on Merv Griffin tomorrow night. And then they would be grateful and say, I hadn't heard of him until Groucho said I should pay attention to him. And he would write them letters and advise them. I know Groucho liked the fact that Cavett was from Nebraska but went to Yale. So some of his stand-up jokes were about, a fish out of water, about this guy from Middle America that ends up. And Groucho was saying like that, stay with that. That's a good angle. And that sets you apart from other comedians. And he thought Woody was brilliant as a filmmaker and as a comedian. So he was open-minded about, for a guy from 1890, he had certain old-fashioned ideas, like about a woman's place. But beyond that, he was a lifelong liberal. He also was, there was a time that lasted a long time where liberals and conservatives respected each other even though they differed. You didn't have this polarization where the enmity was palpable like you do.
Well, they could argue their asses off during the day and then go out for dinner and have their families together at night.
Yeah. I mean, Maury Riskin co-wrote Coconuts and Animal Crackers and Night at the Opera and adapted Room Service to the screen. He was one of Groucho's oldest friends. And, in those early scripts, he was thumbing his nose at authority and the establishment. And the lines he gave Groucho, thumbing his nose at aristocracy and all that. And Riskin ended up taking a really sharp right turn and writing for the Herald Examiner. And it was just one of those, these hippies and their anti-war stuff and blah, blah, blah. And Groucho acknowledged that sharp difference, but it never stood in the way of their friendship. And Riskin was always welcome. And you didn't have Groucho saying, "You stupid idiot, how could you believe it?" It wasn't anything like that. It was fine. And I remember Bob Whitey and Joe Adamson did a superb documentary called The Marx Brothers in a Nutshell.
I remember that.
It was like 80, 81, and they had spent a couple of years doing interviews and then editing it, and then finally it was finished and came out great. And they interviewed Riskin, and got some great stuff. And as they were wrapping up their equipment, Riskin went on a rant. You know, Bob, you hear these songs. I don't like war. I hate war. I don't want any war. Nobody likes war, Bob. And Bob was sort of amused that here's Riskin going on a rant about protest songs almost 10 years after the Vietnam War ended. But for him, that was still something that, there's a young guy. Let me tell you something. We don't go into wars.
When I read that in your book, I was so disappointed because of what he had written for the Marx Brothers. And then to hear that he turned that far to the right.
Right. But that didn't stand in the way. And you know, I think one of the most fascinating TV appearances that's out there, I don't know if it's on YouTube. I know the disc is for sale. It might be on YouTube. Was when Groucho did Firing Line with William F. Buckley, who was one of the leading conservative voices for many, many years. He was the epitome, the personification of the right.
You do you do William F. Buckley? Because I know you do people that nobody else does.
I don't know that I've ever tried, but I can probably try. Groucho, are you happy? Do you think that comedians, vis-a-vis their upbringing, are necessarily unhappy? Anyway.
You got to do the tongue thing that...
thanks, but no.
Yeah.
I'll leave that to David Fry.
Exactly.
Anyway, it's interesting because there isn't an audience, and Groucho doesn't feel the compulsion to go for a laugh with everything he says. So it's these two very intelligent, very well-read, diametrically opposed, mutually admiring men having a conversation about a variety of things, which is sort of how it was at the house. You know, he was, Groucho was a studious and had strong opinions and basically a serious fellow, but that mechanism of taking a straight line and twisting it into a pun or something like that was also always at work. But he didn't feel like he had to always be on, and he was happy to talk about serious subjects and the economy and war and stuff like that. I don't like war. I don't want war. Nobody wants war. Anyway, so even though he was a 19th century guy, he was very tolerant. He had great respect for Betty Ford for coming out and admitting to her drinking problem. And, you know, she founded the Betty Ford Center. He thought Gerald Ford was not very bright and perhaps had been hit in the head once too many times in his fall day. So again, Groucho was able to separate, like it's not because he's a Republican, he's just listened to what he said and concluded that. But I'm not going to blame his wife for being married to him. I admire her for these things she said and did.
I think most of America at that time felt the exact same way.
Yeah. But you might think that, you know, a guy from the turn of the century would think, throw all those bums out or something like that. But he was able to maneuver in and around and judge people. You know, he didn't like pretense. He didn't, you know, he would rather someone disagreed with him than humor him and abandon their stance, you know. One of the other things lessons I learned that I admired Groucho for was his attributing lines to the people who said them. There's, you know, the egos in entertainment and in comedians are, you know, like Macy's balloons. And there's a strong tendency when you hear a funny line to go, "Oh, I'm going to remember that," and then deliver it and bask in it as though it were yours. Groucho was meticulous about saying, you know, Robert Benchley had a funny line. He said, I feel I'm in perfect health except for an occasional heart attack. But Woody Allen had a great line. He said, I don't mind dying. I just don't want to be there when it happens. That's a brilliant line. He's a brilliant man. So he would get the laugh, but credit the person who did it. And I thought that was classy. And I've tried to do that. It's very rare that I'll just hear something and go, I'm going to pretend that's mine. Because there's an artificial gratification. It's like buying a rhinestone and saying, look at the diamond I have. What is the point of that? So, but Groucho was, comfortable enough in his own skin that, he had a healthy ego and he knew he was funny and a significant contribution to pop culture and entertainment. But if someone said something funny, he'd say, Hal Cantor said this. So I try to do that now.
Yeah, I feel the exact same way. It's when I'm
You're just humoring me.
Yeah. I don't want credit for something somebody else said. It's
well, then you're a rarity, because a lot of people, it's like, don't look too closely. I wouldn't look too closely at the postmarks if I were you, Mr. Gill. They ain't any too particular about where it comes from if they can get a laugh. And I'll tell you, one of the great gratifying moments for me was when I was a guest on a Dick Cavett show. He was taping out here, and the other guests were Pat McCormick, David Lloyd, and Larry Gelbart. These were legendary. I mean, David Lloyd wrote the Chuckles Bites the Dust, Mary Tyler Moore show, and was one of the creative people.
The funniest episode ever.
Right. Gelbart. Anyway. And I didn't know I was going to be on the show because there had been talk about it possibly, but then it was explained to me that Pat McCormick didn't want to be on a panel that was more than 3 people, to which I replied, I thought Pat McCormick was more than 3 people.
Yeah.
But I attended it just to watch from the audience. And then during a break in taping, someone with a clipboard and a headset came down and said, we're supposed to tape another show with Rod Steiger, but he's trapped in Malibu from mudslides. So we're going to add you to the panel and tape some more segments. Dick will explain to you what to do. That was in 1985. Dick has yet to explain to me
what to do.
The next thing I knew, I was being wired for sound, and they were making a space for another chair. And Cavett introduces me, and I'm thinking, oh, Jesus. I mean, I felt like if I pretended I was of their caliber, that people would think, who does this asshole think he is? And if I just sat there going, boy, you guys are so funny and successful, they think, why did they bother bringing him out? So I'm trying to think, how do I find a balance between them? So the other guys were telling Pat McCormick stories, which it's a whole subgenre of comedy, because Pat was fearless and outrageous and often did things that if you were there, you would want to dive under a table in embarrassment, but they're funny to hear because they're so outrageous. So they were telling Pat McCormick stories, and there was a pause, and I said, I have a Pat McCormick story, and I have only just met Mr. McCormick. So they're all exchanging glances. And I said, we have a mutual friend named E. Jack Kaplan. And Pat nodded. And I said, he told me that he and you were driving down Cahuenga one night, and you were driving past the Braille Institute. And at that point, I see Cavett put his head in his hand. Oh, no. And all the lights were off, and Pat said, they must be working late tonight. Well, that got the biggest laugh of any of the shows they taped. The thunderclap of laughter, and Gelbart and Lloyd and Cavett laughing, and McCormick looking proud. And what was great was I was able to enjoy having told the joke right and gotten a solid laugh, but I'm saying, here's how brilliant the man sitting next to me is. So that was a living example of giving credit in the moment. And as a matter of fact, as it fades into a commercial, just as it's fading out, you hear David Lloyd, who had said very little. He sort of sat like a coiled snake, and every now and again would dart out. But listen, as they're fading into a commercial, you hear him say, Must be working late tonight. That's wonderful. And that was just a great moment, but I didn't, pass it off as mine. It was something Jack Kaplan told me, Pat McCormick said, and it still got away. Anyway, this had nothing to do with Groucho.
Well, there you have it. The end of part 1 of my conversation with Steve Stoliar. I use the word conversation intentionally because a couple of people have contacted me and said, you've got a strange interview style. You're not exactly Rachel Maddow. And I would respond to that by saying, yeah, no, I'm not. I'm not a trained journalist. I'm just some schlubby actor, writer, director who has the great good fortune to speak to some fascinating people like Steve Stoliar. And I ask the questions that I find interesting, that I want to know the answers to, and that hopefully you want to know the answer to. So that's why I call it a conversation and not an interview. And there's going to be a lot more coming up in part 2 of my conversation with Steve. So don't forget to tune back in next week for that. In the meantime, I've got a homework assignment for all of you listening and watching the show. That is, you have got to go out and buy a copy of Steve's book. That, again, is Raised Eyebrows, My Years Inside Groucho's House by Steve Stoliar. That's Stoliar. There are 2 reasons I am saying that. One, it's a great book. It's an incredible read. And if you're a Marx Brothers fanatic like I am, it's a must-have book. So that's reason number 1. Reason number 2, I promised Steve that I was going to command my listeners and my viewers to go out and buy his book. Now, of course, what Steve doesn't know is that my listeners and viewers don't do anything I tell them to do. How long have I been telling you guys, subscribe to my channel, like my show, comment? Have you done it? No, of course not. You haven't done it. So, but this one is for you because I'm telling you this book is well worth it. As we'll be tuning in next week to see the second half of my conversation with Steve. In the meantime, before I leave you for the day, I want to say this. Folks, no matter what you've been told, COVID is not only real, it is still a menace to all of us. If you've had COVID, if you've been fully vaccinated, and you still wear a mask, it's still a threat. There is the Delta variant and more mutations coming on a daily basis. So considering how many people have not been vaccinated and how many people who have not been vaccinated are going out there in public without masks, it's a danger to all of us. So you have got to stay aware. You've got to stay wary. Truthfully, we reopened everything too soon. I'm sorry we did. I know business is hurting, but so is, dying is worse than hurting. And it's not healthy out there. We need to continue wearing masks. We need to continue social distancing. And we need to demand that our government make it mandatory. I'm sorry for all you freedom people, but this is important. This is about taking care of yourselves, your families, and the community around you. So please, I implore you, be conscious of this. It really is important. Other than that, I wanted to tell everybody that the world, according to Yoni, thanks to our wonderful social media director, Carolyn Anderson, has now entered the 21st century. We're on Instagram. Yes, the world according to Yoni has an Instagram page. So if you're on Instagram, follow it, like the pictures, comment on the pictures, whatever you do on Instagram. I don't know. You probably know far better than I do. I'm going to try to learn, but, in the meantime, help me out here. Also, while the numbers for the podcast seem to be doing well, interestingly, the video, which I thought was going to kick ass everywhere, is doing so-so. I guess because you have to focus more attention in watching. Surprisingly to me, I place it on LinkedIn, and a lot of people watch me on LinkedIn. I don't know why, but my YouTube channel's kind of remaining flat. So please, watch the show on YouTube or watch it on LinkedIn or wherever you can find it. Or listen to the podcast. That's still great, and I'm not knocking it. God knows all my friends are podcasters now, and some of them have great shows. Right, Jody Hamilton? In the meantime, we have a presence now. We have at According to Yoni on Twitter. We have The World According to Yoni on Facebook, as well as my personal Facebook page, Yoni Martin, Marten, just like in the credits for the show. And follow us, like us, do all the things you're supposed to do, support the show. And I'll keep having great guests like Steve who will tell us things that we didn't know before. In the meantime, please stay safe, stay sane, and don't take any shit from anyone. Have a great week. I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.